I sat in my office, staring at the black screens and thinking, this is the moment I can walk away with this money. All these $120 million are my ticket to freedom. This isn't just money. This is my victory. At that moment, I knew I didn't need anything else. I would become a man no one could catch. But I knew I had to be careful. I knew they were coming. The police, the FBI. I knew they were watching me. But what could they do to me? They thought they knew where I was, that I would stay in their net. But I was elusive. I was like a shadow. I got into the BMW I had picked up the keys to a few days ago. Everything was ready. $120 million to build my new life on, to walk away from this game I was tired of. I quickly checked my tracks. No cameras, no traces. In the mirror, I saw myself, and I smiled. But I was wrong. They were closer than I thought. As I pulled out onto the highway, I saw them. Several cars chasing me. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I stepped on the gas. But not just like that. I felt like every kilometer was bringing me closer to new dangers. My car was going crazy fast, but I knew that this would only be the beginning. In the mirror, I saw them approaching, but I was ready. At some point, I felt this wasn't just a chase. This was something more. The police didn't just want to catch me. They wanted to destroy me. They knew who I was. And that's when I realized I couldn't let them take me. Not like this. Not without a fight. I made a sharp turn onto a side road, leaving the police cars behind. But they weren't far behind. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was a fight for survival. I was ready for any turn, but I couldn't afford to make a mistake. And then I did what I had to do. I turned sharply into an abandoned parking lot. I jumped out of the car and felt something squeeze in my chest. I had my guns with me. I fired the first time. I stopped one of the policemen. The second one, seeing this, didn't have time to react, and I shot him. When the second policeman fell, I felt the adrenaline rushing through my blood. Time stood still. I knew that I couldn't afford to stand still. I kept moving, hearing the sirens behind me. But now I had more than just money. I had a gun. I had the upper hand. I got into the BMW, pressed the gas again. This car became my refuge, my shield. The police couldn't catch me anymore. I drove, knowing that now everything would change. But I didn't know that there was another turn waiting for me ahead. I thought that eventually I would manage to get away, but there were too many of them. They blocked all the roads, and then I realized that they would catch me. But I was not going to give up. I was ready for the last step. The police arrived too late to catch me, but there were enough of them to surround me from all sides. I jumped out of the car, continuing to run through the dark alleys. Bullets whistled past. I heard them screaming, but I couldn't stop. I ran a few more blocks, and this time, they caught me. But their grip wasn't strong enough. I was fast on my feet. Soon I was free again. The police tried to catch me, but I was too smart to fall into their hands. I kept moving, and despite all their efforts, they couldn't catch me. And just when I thought I was safe, just when the police realized they couldn't catch me, I realized they weren't done yet. They couldn't beat me. They couldn't catch me, because I was already one step ahead. And so, despite all the police's efforts, I kept going. I was sure I wouldn't fall into their hands. I was a master, and at this game, I was a winner. When I committed that brutal act and left the scene of the crime, I was sure it would be my last chance. But they weren't that naive. The police didn't know who I was yet, but they would find out. And damn, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Just as I was about to flee, the cop's phone I'd left at the scene started vibrating. He was still alive, and that call would be the last they'd make before they announced me to the entire country. The DEA. Yeah, I'm sure he's alive. We have his tracks, but it looks like he's not alone. We need the entire city's force, the voice on the other end of the line said. I felt my blood run cold. I knew this was just the beginning. They were starting to play by my rules, which meant the game was getting even more dangerous. We have to catch him. Otherwise, everything will be lost. The policeman's voice was determined. He was not ready to give up. Soon, I was put on the wanted list. But I already knew that it would not end there. The DEA is not just any police department. It is the most experienced and brutal squad, specializing in capturing the most dangerous criminals. Those who dare to commit daring robberies, murders, and leave no trace. They came to me, and that meant that now I had to be prepared for the worst. A few weeks had passed since I took $120 million from the bank. Since then, I continued to rob. It had already become a game. I did not just take money, I built a whole strategy. I manipulated people, made them do whatever I wanted. I robbed big businessmen, banks, investors, officials, anyone who could become part of this game. With each new robbery, I became more confident. I changed tactics, became more and more cunning. I entered banks, hid in crowded places, disguised myself as an ordinary person. It seemed that I was becoming a real master of my craft, and no one could catch me. You can't get away from us that easily. One of the policemen once said when they caught one of my men who accidentally fell into their net. They thought they found me, but it was a trap. I was always one step ahead. I changed routes, changed cars, left false tracks. It was all part of the game. But now I realized that they were following me more and more persistently every day. They began to collect information, send special agents, and, worst of all, they involved the DEA. So you think you can catch me? I sat in my hiding place and looked at the city map, analyzing every step. Robbing had become easy, but remaining unnoticed was more difficult. I was being hunted, and every day I thought about how to avoid being caught. I kept going. It wasn't just me who was in the game, but everyone I had forced to work for me. As soon as the money was in my hands, I went on the next robbery. My brain no longer perceived it as an ordinary crime, but as a long-awaited test. I saw myself becoming more confident with each robbery. The police and the DEA tried to catch me, but their mistakes became for me the next steps in the game. And with each new plan, I became more and more confident in my victory. In one of my last robberies, I stumbled upon something I didn't expect to find. I was following the trail, ready to strike again, but it turned out to be a trap. Playing with fire had become too dangerous again, and I suddenly realized that they weren't just chasing me anymore. They were chasing me with the intent to kill. They knew I wasn't an ordinary robber, and I was starting to feel their brutal methods. Meanwhile, the DEA was taking more and more drastic measures. They weren't just looking for evidence, they wanted to catch me dead or alive. At this point, new players were entering the game. I didn't know who I was dealing with, but they were willing to do anything to stop me. He's not just stealing money, he's destroying the system, and we can't let this continue. I heard conversations during one of the meetings between the operatives. I realized that in this game, it wasn't just me who could manipulate, but other people who could trap me. And just when I thought I had them beat again, they made their first decisive move. They were getting closer every day. I felt like my game was ending. But I knew that if they stopped me, it wouldn't just be the end for me, it would be the end for my entire game. I may be trapped, but I still have a way out, I thought, preparing my next move. As I continued my game, I realized more and more that I didn't need to limit myself to robberies and manipulations to achieve my goal. If you want to become a real ruler, you have to go further. And so I went further. With each new crime, I became more and more aggressive, more and more self-confident. The law, that was for those who were afraid of losing everything. I wasn't afraid. I broke the laws, regardless of the consequences, because I knew that if I followed their rules, I would never become who I wanted to be. I was not just a robber, I was in search of my absolute power, and for this I had to do everything. One day on the way to another deal, I was driving my BMW, not thinking at all about what could happen. I was in a good mood, as always, because another big deal was waiting for me, another big blow. I drove along the city streets, not noticing everything around me. It was morning, the streets were almost empty, when at a speed of 120 kilometers per hour, I hit 10 old ladies at once at a crosswalk who did not have time to cross the street. I braked sharply, but it was too late. The old ladies were lying on the asphalt, their bodies were mutilated. At that moment, when I got out of the car to see what I had done, I felt not fear, but irritation. This was not the moment to be weak. I knew it could get me into trouble, but on the other hand, I was sure that if I ran away fast, no one would catch me. I was right. It was just another violation on my way. I was too important a player to look back on such trifles. I got in the car and drove away, leaving behind ruined lives. The police later found the bodies, but of course, I was already far away. In their eyes, I was just a criminal, but I was more than they could imagine. They tried to investigate the case, but none of their investigations led to a result. I was too smart for them. I kept breaking the law, never looking back. The law was like a piece of paper to me, a piece of paper that I could tear up. Every day I committed new crimes, speeding, carjacking, murder. The list could go on and on. I threatened, manipulated, extorted money from the most powerful people without any mercy. I broke every possible law, but it didn't stop me. On the contrary, with each new crime, I felt my strength. I became someone who wasn't afraid of consequences, and the more I broke, the stronger I became. I soon realized that the law is just a framework created for the weak. All these people, police, lawyers, judges, they were all trying to catch me in their nets. But I had it all: money, power, the ability to manipulate. I knew how to make people work for me, how to avoid punishment. They couldn't catch me, and if they did, I always knew how to get out of any situation. My crimes became more and more daring. I started setting up entire operations, extorting money from people, threatening their families. Ordinary criminals rob banks, but I was already at another level. I began to dictate the terms, arranging real deceptions and manipulations on a global level. But despite all this, I could not stop. I was already so deep in the game that I did not know how to get out. Each crime became a part of my identity. I became the one everyone feared, and no one could stop me. Those old ladies at the crosswalk became more than just statistics for me. They became part of a larger plan. I understood that I had to do everything to strengthen my power. I was ready to break any laws, even if it cost someone their life. The law was not for me. I became a monster, and I was ready to destroy everything in my path. There were no more obstacles. When I hit the old ladies, I not only broke the law, I destroyed another facet of my humanity. I became more than just a killer. I became someone who feared neither people, nor laws, nor consequences. I became someone who could do anything and not be afraid. My life was now a game, and I was its main player. The law no longer existed for me. I continued to rob, break rules, extort money, and control entire worlds. But every new step strengthened my belief that I was above everyone else. I was more than just a criminal. I was a man who could take power into his own hands without looking back at what would happen next. My goal was clear. I would rule this world, and no one would be able to stop me. No matter how hard the police tried, no matter how hard they chased me, all their efforts seemed in vain. I was always one step ahead. I went into the shadows, I was not visible, and the traces of my presence became increasingly elusive. I became a master of disguise, a real ghost. They caught me, but I always eluded, and with each new escape I became even more confident, even more determined. I continued to threaten, continued to manipulate, and remained unreachable for everyone. However, no matter how I hid, no matter how I used my tricks and money to disappear, the world continued to move on. My fame grew, and the consequences of my actions became more and more destructive. I left behind many ruined destinies and lost lives. My game, it seemed, was coming to its logical conclusion. But even the most skilled robber and manipulator cannot hide forever. The police, although they could not find me for many months, did not forget about my case. My name became known to everyone. Every corner of the country, every corner of the world knew who I was. I was not just a criminal, I was a symbol of what happens when a person stops being afraid. I became a challenge to the system, but this system was still strong. I decided to leave the country. It was obvious that I needed to find a new place for my business, for my empire. I quickly arranged a move to a country where my past was unknown. I thought I could start over with a clean slate. After all, I was too smart to just fall into the hands of the police. It was too easy. But like in any movie, my luck was bound to run out. I hid for a long time, too long. I enjoyed the peace and confidence that I would never be caught. I set up a new business, new deals, new manipulations, and I thought I could now live in peace. But something went wrong. One of my old acquaintances, who was doing business in another country, turned me in. He was a threat to my position, and I did not think he would dare to take such a step. But this was the very moment when I underestimated the person. He knew who I was, knew my actions, and perhaps he just wanted more money. One way or another, he reported my whereabouts to the local authorities. My life in the new country, where I was trying to hide, collapsed like dominoes. Soon I found myself in the hands of those I was trying to escape. The police in this country worked quickly. They blocked all my attempts to leave, took my accounts, and contacted international law enforcement agencies. My arrest was quick. I didn't even have time to understand what was happening when I was detained in one of the luxury restaurants where I was having dinner with several business partners. I did not expect that in the end they would catch me so easily. The police acted without any noisy operations, just quietly and confidently blocked all the exits, and I was isolated. During the investigation, they tried to put pressure on me, but I was not going to give in. I kept quiet. I was good at manipulation, but now I could only hope for the best. I knew that my connections and money could not help in this case. Here in this country, the same forces would not protect me as in my home country. I ended up in prison, and even though I was captured, I didn't feel like I had won a full victory from those who had captured me. They thought that was the end of my story, but for me it was just the beginning of a new chapter. I knew that my connections, my network, my ability to manipulate, none of that would disappear even if I was behind bars. They may have caught me, but they hadn't caught me completely. I was still the one holding the strings. I didn't plan on being in prison for the rest of my life. I was ready for new games, new manipulations, and I knew that my enemies would never be able to destroy me. I would always be in the game, even if I had to play by someone else's rules. But in that moment, I realized something important. Winning isn't always about being one step ahead. Sometimes winning is just being in the right place at the right time. And even though I ended up in prison, my story isn't over yet. It may be the end of this chapter, but it's not the end of the game. That's how my story in this world ended. I went into the shadows, but the shadows don't leave me. It wasn't the end, but the beginning of a new game. And maybe in the next round, I'll be the one who comes out on top.